very much for agreeing to do this interview for our network. My first question to you would be whether you could briefly explain what the Internet of Things is and how it relates to intimate partner violence.
Sure. So the Internet of Things, well, it can be defined as the interconnection, so via the internet, of computing devices embedded within everyday objects, and it enables them to send and receive data. So IoT is really, it's an umbrella term, so it's not limited to one technology or item. Rather, it's applicable across a variety of items that are what we often see as written down as smart items and devices. And so what technologists have given these products is a network functionality, which means that they are able to send and receive data with each other, and we're able to control them remotely as a result. Increasingly, people will see these in the forms of previously offline products like kettles, TVs, cars, locks and lights, but now they're smart, so you can control them remotely.
So as an example, the smart lock, for example, could you maybe explain some of the things that you said with that concrete example?
Yeah, definitely. So with smart locks, for example, there's the user can set up perimeters and where when they leave the home, when they're outside their perimeter, so when they're outside of their space. So when they leave that space, the doors lock or the spaces lock. They can also, while in the home, kind of address remotely which doors are locked and which doors are unlocked, which obviously for implications can be really beneficial, but can also have quite a few downsides if misused.
So, for example, it would gather data on whether a door is closed or open, and when it's closed, when it's open, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And so when somebody leaves the perimeter as well, so it can be used as well for tracking location and tracking when that item is used. So if somebody has left the home that day, there would be a potential log of that if the user is chosen for that data to be recorded and communicated. But it also has the ability for it to be sent to different devices, so a log being sent to somebody's mobile phone and not just stored on the device itself. It can be sent remotely to a variety of devices to communicate to.
Okay, and if you had to describe it in 2 sentences or 3, how do you see IoT relating to intimate partner violence?
Okay, so 2 or 3 sentences is a bit tricky, but really it's old harms in new ways. So in terms of intimate partner violence, what we see is that domestic abuse incorporates a range of harms, so emotional, psychological, financial, and many more abuses, and IoT essentially escalates the risk in each of these experiences, whether that's through monitoring, stalking, harassment and threats. It's a tool that we're seeing perpetrators of abuse utilize rather than a brand new form of abuse in itself. It incorporates previously and currently known forms of abuses, but used as a tool to facilitate them.
Great. So from your research on the Gender and IoT project, what are some common forms in which perpetrators abuse IoT devices for their benefit? What have you discovered?
Well, so from the research that's taken place within the Gender and IoT project at UCL, the team have witnessed a variety of ways in which perpetrators of abuse have utilised IoT for domestic abuse for their benefit. So again, they're utilising these technologies to facilitate the abuses they'd be conducting anyway. So monitoring, stalking, harassment and threats. These are commonplace. And in terms of IoT, most commonly what has been seen is that trackers are being used in quite a widespread way. So trackers marketed to parents, pet owners, or if you're like me and you lose your keys a lot, they're being repurposed by perpetrators so that they can track an individual's location without that individual being wholly aware of that behavior and that action. For survivors, when as kind of my previous role as an independent domestic violence advocate, what we would see is that survivors would be expressing that their perpetrator would always seem to be at the supermarket at the same time, or they'd bump into them at the street quite often. And this was kind of a sign that some tracking was taking place. So that's been quite commonplace in what we've been finding. But the use of IoT to monitor not just location, but also a survivor's daily life is becoming increasingly commonplace. So the Gender and IoT Project's research has also found that devices such as Google Home or Alexa, so home hub IoTs, have enabled perpetrators to connect with devices throughout the home to maintain that control and cause distress to a survivor. So we talked about smart locks. This has prevented survivors from leaving the home, instances in which survivors have been kind of allowed into certain rooms at certain times of the day through the perpetrator's access to the devices remotely whilst not even being in the property, or where lights have been turned on and off at certain times to really cause distress and challenge for the survivor to even sleep. That's emerging and increasingly becoming available as IoT becomes more affordable and accessible to perpetrators of abuse and people in general. And perpetrators are not only repurposing IoT's kind of main purposes, so for lights or lock purposes, but also the additional tools that they have access to. So a lot of these IoT devices, they can connect to the internet. They also encourage you, because it helps with marketing, to share and to be on social media. And having that access to social media with these devices being interconnected allows perpetrators to either monitor a survivor's social media, but also access social media when maybe passwords are known, or aspect of coercive control is also part of the relationship. And so perpetrators may then access those social media accounts through the IoT devices and cause potentially reputational damage, emotional damage, psychological damage through uploading images without consent, and image-based abuse, and other kind of forms of harassment as well.
Since a lot of our members are perpetrator programs, one of the questions that poses itself is what perpetrator programs can do to prevent or stop the abuse of IoT in the abusive relationships.
Yeah, so kind of the first stage for kind of perpetrator programs is for kind of working towards prevention is first being aware that technology facilitated abuse in IoT can be used as a tool in intimate partner violence. So that's really the first step. It's quite emerging in the domestic abuse sector. So this kind of conversation is really the first step and is fantastic. And then kind of secondly for perpetrator programs is having the appropriate systems in place to record instances in which perpetrators may be disclosing to teams that they have been using technologies to facilitate the abuse that takes place with IoTs and other technologies, because without being aware of the frequencies and the forms that these technology facilitated abuses take place, it's very difficult when it's a program that risk assesses and safety plans to be able to do that properly without knowing the frequency and prevalence of a form of abuse. And so that's really key as well.
I'm sorry, did the programs that you worked with mention any red flags that programs could maybe look out for when they talk to abusers about these types of violence?
So red flags would potentially be kind of terms that have unfortunately been quite common in kind of general conversation of cyber stalking or checking up, or I wanted to quite often perpetrators may in research that is found present it as helping behaviors. So I wanted to help the person I'm in a relationship with by kind of setting up her computer, or I would purchase her phone, or I handle the phone bill. All of these kind of actions allow the perpetrator to have access to the phone records or the phone itself, or access to the phone. Even if they have access to the phone bill, it's very easily that the phone can kind of the access can be taken away through that as well. So red flags where it may seem kind of minor and presented as helping behaviours are kind of common signs that what we're seeing, and really that comes as well for the teams in the form of education of team members of how to spot when there may be a concern of perpetrators using IoTs in the forms of their abuse, because if the teams can feel confident and comfortable in responding, this allows in the programs that take place that these kind of normalized behaviors in cyber stalking or monitoring or having control over a survivor's devices and technological items, as actually it's being deconstructed as it's not normal and it's not okay.
If you could summarize 3 of the key takeaways that you would want perpetrator programs to take away from this interview, what would they be?
The technology facilitated abuses, particularly IoTs, they're not going away. It's an emerging trend. We have to learn as best we can about this emerging risk, because as things become, these items become more affordable and accessible, we will be seeing them. And there is the concern that these are risk indicators of harm. And so it's our responsibility for safety planning and risk assessments to acknowledge them. Education is key in that, and kind of keeping an awareness of this, alongside being kind of curious. The way that this is being presented by potentially perpetrators in the ways that they talk about it is often presented in helping behaviours, and so it's being curious as what actually these behaviours, the implications of them are. And so those kind of really are key takeaways of learning, being aware that this is present, and being mindful that this isn't going to necessarily be presented in the form of this is a violence and the perpetrator acknowledging it as a violence, and rather that this may be construed as a normalized behavior, which in a society where we are implementing things like trackers and we are implementing things that actually there's a whole debate around privacy and things like this, that this may have been normalized in a perpetrator's kind of point of view, and actually we need to deconstruct that as having power and control over somebody else's devices and access to them isn't normal and not okay.
So it's not necessarily about the perpetrator program facilitators knowing all the technical details. It's more about having an idea of what is possible and then connecting it to coercive control and controlling behaviors, right?
Absolutely. Perpetrator programs are well versed on financial abuse and psychological abuse, and so the kind of well-known forms of harm that we're aware of in our risk assessments and safety planning. Technology is a tool that is essentially facilitating these forms of abuse. This is something that we are aware of already. We just need to look at it through a lens of this other tool. How is it being utilized to cause harm? There's no way that we can all consider every form of technology. I definitely can't, but it's being mindful that, okay, they've mentioned a phone. What does this mean? Do they have access to this phone? Are they the account holder? Security systems in homes, are they the account holder? What details do they have from that? What position does that place them within the power and control dynamic? So it's being curious around each kind of conversation that you have of what that may mean, just like with any other form of abuse.